What if I told you that it was possible to replace your current income with income that's generated from your property investments? Like, what would that look like if you were able to substitute income that you earn from your job or your business, or say all of your side hustles or other income sources, and be able to go all in on property and have property be the major contributor to your overall incoming finances? Well, I'm here to tell you that it's possible, and I've seen people do it time and time again. I've been able to do it for myself. And in this video, I'm going to break down the top 2 ways that people commonly do it. And I'm also going to show you step by step how I approached this very topic. Who am I and why should you listen to me? Well, look, I'm just a real estate investor. I'm a guy who's been able to build an 8-figure real estate portfolio just over the last 13 years. And I've also been able to deliver over $170 million in real estate assets just in the last 6 years alone. And these are buildings that you can physically walk up and touch and smell and feel, and they're real, and they have been brought into existence. It's not some pipe dream in my mind or pipeline that's coming over the next few years. This is stuff that has been delivered on the ground. But now, I wouldn't have been able to do any of that had I not had a team, had I not had the time and the space and the flexibility to be able to do this full time. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's goal is to be a full-time real estate investor. The best part about real estate as an asset class is that you can put in a very small amount of time but get a very large return back on that time. It's pretty typical for a lot of our members and the clients that I'm working with that they're making over $1,000 per hour from their real estate activities, largely because they're investing in a system that I call forced equity. And so what this does is it really then knocks every other possible high value activity that you could be investing your time in out of the park. Because other than business is probably the fastest way to get to wealth, but real estate is second to none in terms of your time input and the lack of dynamic that, say, a business would have with so many other facets that you've got to be across as the business owner. So real estate is second to none when it comes to building wealth, but ultimately replacing your income. So let's just break this down for a moment. What's the first way and the main way that people do go about replacing their income? Well, first and foremost, it's generally because they have what we call positive gearing assets in their portfolio. These are typically higher yielding assets that are over and above the traditional, say, residential property investment, where they're paying over and above money into your pocket each month after all of the expenses have been paid. So you can expect that all of the property management expenses, all of the interest component, if there's a mortgage in place, all of the land tax and the council rates and the property maintenance and repairs, all of that stuff is taken care of by the rent. And then there is also some money left over at the end of the day to help fund your lifestyle. Now, this method typically takes a lot longer to put into practice. It could be, say, a 5 to 6 to 7 year journey if you approach it very strategically. But typically what we see is real estate assets like rent by room, short-term accommodation strategies. You might have commercial property strategies in there. You could be using a forced equity strategy where ultimately you are adding instant value to a property and doing it in a way where you can partially sell down some of that property, then roll the profits back into the remainder of the property to then lower the debt loan to value ratio to a manageable point where then the income that's coming through from the property far outweighs the expenses because you're not having this heavy interest bill each month. That can be another great way to increase the cash flow, the net cash flow that comes through from the property. Now, some people, they've got the patience and they've got the time. They enjoy the work that they do day to day and they're not in a hurry to go and sack the boss and get out of their job. They're happy to kind of utilize the income and the serviceability that comes through from their job and ultimately just build their portfolio over a longer extended period of time. And they do so by trickling in these positive cash flow properties along the way. That's perfectly fine if you've got all of those things. But if you're sitting there and you're someone who's in a bit more of a rush, say for instance you need a big change in your life, or you need a big transformation in your finances and in your income, perhaps you're not earning enough from the skill that you've got and the skill that you sell back to the marketplace in the form of a job or a business, and you're looking for a way to make more money from another activity like, say, real estate investing, where you can really put the time in but make a lot more money back. Now, the way that I approached this was back in 2012, I'd been working at the Hawthorn Football Club for 6 years. It was an incredible period of growth for the football club. It was a great time to be there, an awesome era where we had lots and lots of success. But for me, I knew that I wanted to go all in on property and running businesses. And so for me, I'd already started to dabble in property in the last couple of years that I was at the Hawthorn Football Club, and I just fell in love and just became so passionate about the real estate topic. Not to mention, I was also going around to a lot of events and seminars and learning and educating myself and networking and building my own network. And there was an opportunity that came up to really represent one of these businesses that used to run a lot of the events in the property education space. And the opportunity was to become a consultant that really was the conduit between the audience and the people who came along to these events, and then the business that was selling the educational services and the programs. And so my role was to really sit there on the phones, call people after they'd attended an event, really find out what was important to them, what they were trying to achieve, where they were at in their life, where they wanted to go, what their goals looked like. And it was up to me to really then help position it in a way that if I felt like the education was going to be something that would take them to that next level and help them get from A to B, then walk them through the steps and what was involved and what they would need to do and undertake in order to ultimately achieve their goals. And so for me, jumping from the Hawthorn Football Club into this consulting role, I was taking a big leap of faith, because I was ultimately going from a very secure job working in a very high profile organization within the AFL, and I was ultimately going into what you would call a commission only role. So if I was to sell a program or enroll someone into an education program, I would ultimately make a commission on doing that. Now, the commissions were good, they were healthy. However, I was having to back myself in. Now, I must say, at this time in my life, I was like early 20s. I had no sales skills whatsoever. I had to develop all of these skills, but I was prepared to put the work in and ultimately work on myself and develop my own skill sets so that I could then add more value to the marketplace. But for me, it was a transitional step. It was something that was going to allow me to then still focus on my property and my property efforts in a more part-time role, so more than I could expend working at the Hawthorn Football Club, because the hours there were very big. But I could sort of operate under this sort of quasi part-time consulting, part-time property, and continue to grow my efforts in property and my wealth building. I did that for a few years, and then ultimately went to the step of jumping up on stage and going from speaking to one-to-one on the phones to one-to-many at the events themselves. I was still selling the same products and the same programs, just doing it in front of an audience. And for me, this was a much better way to then ultimately increase my income again, because now I would have a much better opportunity at being able to sell more by doing less. And so it was that step there that then really helped me go probably 3/4 full-time into property, because ultimately I didn't have to spend as much time on the phones ringing people. I was going and rocking up to an event for 2 hours and was probably making the same amount of money in a 2-hour event that I used to make in a month. And so it became a very good use of my time, which meant that then I could spend more time building my portfolio. But to cut a long story short, how I went full-time in property is back in 2017 when I started my first property business. What I would do is I would go out and I would find great opportunities in the property market where we could ultimately build, say, a couple of townhouses, maybe a small apartment building, and I owned my patch of turf. So I used to operate from about six different suburbs on a small stretch of beach in Bayside, Melbourne, and I would only be looking for properties that were really beachside. So they either had water views, they were a close walk to the beach, but it offered that really nice premium lifestyle. And how I did that was that I was able to go out there and acquire properties partner with other people who had more access to capital than I did on my own back. I still did my own projects, but I also then partnered with other people who were typically time poor, had good amounts of serviceability and good amounts of capital to invest, and I would ultimately do it on their behalf as the working partner. And what I did was, when I set my business up, I would then invoice each of these projects a monthly management fee, and I would ultimately then be on the hook to deliver an outcome in order to then make a profit at the back end of the project. So not only was I getting drip fed some money along the way, but I was also then incentivized to try and outperform the budget and the feasibility that we had for a forced equity project, to make sure that I was also building my wealth at the same time. So what this looks like is by really setting up an entity, a legal entity. Now that could be in the form of a company, it could be in the form of a trust, a discretionary trust, or a unit trust for that matter. And then you can set up the trust structures or the legal entities for each and every property. Now this is the fastest way for you to be able to go full-time in property, because ultimately it allows you to scale a lot quicker into a multiple property portfolio, which ultimately provides you a monthly income. Now, the services that you are effectively carrying out on these projects, and then the fees that you are charging each project, get built into the project budget. So it's not like it's over and above. It's not like there's extra capital that's coming from somewhere and you're just moving it around your entities. No, you are literally providing services to another entity. It's somewhat a related entity, but ultimately it allows you to build up a profit and loss statement in your consulting entity. And so after a good 18 months to 2 years, you then find yourself in a position where you've been able to create another recognizable source of income that a lot of the banks and lenders will actually acknowledge as proper conventional income. And then you can ultimately then substitute your serviceability that you might be getting from your job or your other business or other income sources that you have. But not only that, the income that you're generating each month that's coming through is then also building up to a level where it replaces the income that you have earned from other sources. And this is how I took the step into full-time property. After 12 months, I ended up selling half of that business, and we then rebranded it HCO, which is what it's known as today. And it still generates these fees called development management fees every single month, which helps us keep the lights on, which helps us pay our team members, which helps us provide, great services and pay the insurances and all of those sorts of running operational costs to deliver that service. But then we also then have a stake in the project as well. So we're also building the wealth of the business. And so that's how I've gone about approaching it. That's how you can go about approaching it as well. And ultimately, it's a great way to go all in on property, or to just do it partially so that you're building up your income sources in the background to then ultimately borrow more money to build your portfolio over the coming years. I hope you got a lot of value out of that. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and this video, and I'll see you on the next one.